The courtroom was a theater of quiet, suffocating cruelty, and Elara was its unwilling star. She stood alone at the respondents' table, the wood smooth and cold beneath her trembling fingers. Across the divide sat David, the man who had promised her a lifetime, now regarding her with the casual disinterest of a man looking at a piece of furniture he was about to replace. Beside him, his high-priced lawyer, Mr. Harrison, rose to his feet. He was a monument to predatory confidence, his bespoke suit gleaming under the sterile fluorescent lights. He smiled, but it was a smile that never reached his eyes. "Miss Vance," Harrison began, his voice a silken weapon that filled the room, designed to be reasonable and lethal all at once. "You are seeking 50% of Mr. Thorne's assets. An ambitious claim. We are here to determine what, precisely, you contributed to the accumulation of those assets." He let the word hang in the air, dripping with insinuation, for the judge and the whispering gallery to absorb. Before we see how Elara faced this public execution, make sure you are subscribed and have your notifications turned on. You will not want to miss the moment this all blows up. Elara felt her hands clench in her lap. The storm raged within her, but her face remained a mask of practiced calm. Harrison gestured toward David, who leaned back, projecting an aura of effortless success. "My client, Mr. Thorne, built Thorne Innovations from the ground up. It is a testament to his genius, his vision, and his 100-hour work weeks. It is now valued," he paused for dramatic effect, "at $90 million. A gasp rippled through the spectators. Elara's mind flashed back, an unwelcome reel of memories playing behind her eyes. She didn't see a $90 million genius. She saw David in their tiny, third-floor apartment in Chicago, the one with the rattling pipes and the heater that never worked. She remembered the feel of her aching feet after a 12-hour double shift, waiting tables by day and cleaning offices by night, just so they could make rent while he chased his dream. She remembered her fingers cramping as she typed and retyped his business proposals, her own college education indefinitely postponed. She remembered brewing endless pots of coffee at 3 in the morning, listening to him code, being the silent, supportive bedrock upon which he had built his entire empire. She had managed their finances when they had nothing, stretching every dollar. She had been his partner in everything but name. "I supported my husband," Elara said, her voice quiet but clear in the suddenly silent room. "I ran our household. I worked 2 jobs for the first 6 years of our marriage so he could focus entirely on his company without worrying about our bills." Harrison chuckled. It was a dry, dismissive sound that echoed in the chamber. "You mean you did the chores, Miss Vance? Commendable, if unremarkable, domestic duties. But we are not here to value a marriage. We are here to value a business. You cannot seriously expect this court to believe that making pot roast and paying the electricity bill entitles you to $45 million. The gallery tittered. Elara felt a hot, shameful flush creep up her neck. He had twisted her sacrifice into a punchline. She chanced to look at David, a desperate, last-ditch appeal to the man she had loved for 12 years. He wouldn't meet her gaze. Instead, he caught her eye and gave a slight, pitying shake of his head, as if her claim was the most pathetic, delusional thing he had ever witnessed. That look was more painful than any of Harrison's verbal barbs. It was the look of a man who had completely erased her from the story of their shared life. He had not just left her, he had unwritten her. Harrison pressed his advantage, his voice sharp and methodical. "Your Honor, Mr. Thorne was the visionary. He secured the patents, he courted the investors. Miss Vance, meanwhile," he picked up a document from his table, "has no college degree. She has no professional skills to speak of, unless one counts her current role." He peered at the paper. "A part-time librarian's assistant. Your annual income, if I am reading this correctly, is just under $24,000. He let the disparity sink in, a chasm of 9 figures separating the 2 tables. "Mr. Thorne, in his generosity, has already offered a one-time settlement of $250,000. A sum that would allow you to start over, perhaps even get some of that education you never pursued." His tone was laced with condescension. "Yet you refused it. You are demanding a sum that is frankly ludicrous. It speaks not of a desire for fairness, but of pure, unadulterated greed." Elara felt the blood drain from her face. He made her sound like a parasite, a common grifter. She looked at the woman sitting next to David, Chloe, his new fiancée. She was 24, glamorous, and wearing a sharp white pantsuit that probably cost more than Elara earned in a month. Her blonde hair was perfect, her expression one of bored superiority. Chloe leaned over and whispered something in David's ear. He smiled, a genuine smile, the kind he used to give Elara. They were a team now. Elara was just an obstacle to be cleared, a final, messy piece of administrative work before they could begin their perfect, wealthy life together. Miss Vance, the judge's voice boomed, startling her. Judge Albright, a man who clearly had a golf game to get to, looked at her over his glasses, his impatience palpable. Mr. Harrison makes a compelling point. The offer on the table seems more than fair, considering your limited involvement in the direct business operations. Are you sure you wish to proceed with this highly ambitious claim? It was not a question. It was a warning. The judge's words were a clear signal. He had already made up his mind. She was the poor ex-wife trying to cash in. Her contributions, her sacrifices, her 12 years of life, were invisible, unquantifiable, and therefore worthless in the face of David's gleaming $90 million net worth. The world seemed to shrink around her, the walls of the courtroom closing in. The weight of their collective judgment, the whispers, the titters, the judge's impatience, the lawyer's scorn, and David's cold pity, pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. They saw her as small, weak, and insignificant, a ghost of a life that David had already moved on from. She opened her mouth to speak, to defend the dozen years she had poured into their marriage, but the words would not come. Her throat was tight with unshed tears of rage and humiliation. In that moment, staring at the smug, triumphant faces of her enemies, Elara felt utterly and completely defeated. Judge Albright cleared his throat, his voice laced with the impatience Elara had come to dread. In light of the evidence presented, or rather, the lack of evidence to the contrary, the court is inclined to agree with Mr. Harrison's assessment. The offer of $250,000 seems more than. He paused, glancing at the clock on the wall. We will break for lunch. Court resumes at 2 p.m., at which time I will deliver my final ruling. The gavel cracked, a sharp, definitive sound that felt like a nail in the coffin of her life. Elara practically fled the courtroom, the echoes of David's smirk and Chloe's bored expression burning into her back. She found a secluded wooden bench in a quiet, marble corridor, the cold of the polished stone seeping through her thin blazer. She felt hollowed out, a shell of the woman she was supposed to be. All she had wanted was what was fair, what she was owed for her years of sacrifice. But in their world of power and money, fairness was a commodity she simply could not afford. Her hands, which had been trembling, were now numb. Her lawyer, Sarah, a young public defender clearly in over her head, found her a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of lukewarm coffee from the courthouse vending machine. She sat beside Elara, her youthful optimism visibly dented. Don't let them get to you, Elara, Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. Harrison is a bully. That's his strategy, to make you feel worthless so you'll take their lowball offer. It's working, Elara whispered, her voice cracking. Even the judge looks at me like I'm something he scraped off his shoe. He hates me for wasting his time. We just need to prove your contribution, Sarah insisted, more to herself than to Elara. We need something concrete. Did you ever attend business meetings? Did you help him write the source code? Anything tangible? Elara shook her head, a fresh wave of despair washing over her. No. He always said, I wouldn't understand it. He kept that part of his life completely separate. He said it was to protect me from the stress. She finally understood. He was not protecting her. He was excluding her, methodically writing her out of their success story long before it was even written, ensuring she would have no claim. As she sat there, defeated, her hand instinctively went to the small, simple silver locket she always wore around her neck. It was the only thing she had from her past, found with her when she was left at the hospital as a baby. It was plain, unadorned, and worth nothing monetarily, but it was her only tangible link to a history she had never known, a history of being an orphan passed through a series of foster homes. She opened it, a nervous, familiar habit. Inside was the tiny, faded black and white photograph of a smiling young woman, her mother, she assumed. On the other side, tucked behind the photo, was a minuscule, folded piece of paper, brittle with age. It had been there for as long as she could remember. She had looked at it 100 times over the years. It bore a single, elegantly written name, Silas Finch. The name meant nothing to her. She had tried searching for it years ago, but Silas Finch yielded thousands of results. It was a dead end, a forgotten ghost. Just as she was about to close the locket, a man in an impeccably tailored gray suit paused at the end of the corridor. He was not a lawyer or a court official. He carried an expensive leather briefcase and moved with an air of quiet authority that was utterly out of place. Elara recognized him. He had been sitting in the back of the gallery all morning, observing the proceedings with an unnerving stillness. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, met hers for a fleeting second. There was no pity in his gaze, only a cool, calculating assessment. Then, he turned and walked away. The afternoon session began, and it was even more brutal than the morning. Harrison, sensing his victory, was like a shark tasting blood. He called a financial analyst to the stand, a man with cold eyes and a colder demeanor, who systematically dismantled any claim Elara might have. He presented charts and figures that painted her as a financial nonentity, a simple homemaker whose contributions had no place on a balance sheet. So, in your expert opinion, Harrison concluded, what was Miss Vance's direct financial contribution to the $90 million valuation of Thorne Innovations? The analyst adjusted his glasses. 0, he said. The word was cold, absolute, and echoed in the silent courtroom. Her name does not appear on a single incorporation document, investment agreement, or patent filing. From a purely financial and legal standpoint, she was not involved. David could not suppress a small, triumphant smile. It was over. Elara knew it, Sarah knew it. Judge Albright cleared his throat, his face set, ready to deliver the final verdict. In light of the evidence presented, this court is inclined to rule that. He was cut off. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with such force that they banged against the walls, the sound like a thunderclap. Every head in the room, including the judge's, snapped toward the commotion. The man in the gray suit, Julian, strode in. He was not alone. He was flanked by 2 other individuals, men who looked less like legal aides and more like corporate bodyguards. They moved with a purpose that instantly shifted the entire gravity of the room. Your Honor, forgive the interruption, Julian said. His voice was calm but resonant, imbued with an authority that commanded immediate, absolute attention. My name is Julian Croft. I am senior counsel for Finch Global Enterprises. I am here on a matter of extreme urgency that directly pertains to the respondent, Miss Elara Vance. A murmur, like a rush of wind, swept through the courtroom. Finch Global Enterprises. It was not just a company. It was a legendary, multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, a global empire with interests in every corner of the world. It was owned by the most elusive and powerful billionaire on the planet, a man so reclusive he had not been photographed in over 30 years. Silas Finch. First, Finch. Elara's heart stopped. She heard the name, and her blood ran cold, turning to ice in her veins. Silas Finch. The name from her locket. It could not be. It was impossible. Judge Albright, visibly flustered by this high-profile intrusion, stammered, Mr. Croft, this is a private divorce proceeding. I fail to see what business Finch Global could possibly have here. Mr. Croft's gaze was unyielding. He did not look at the judge. He looked directly at Elara, a strange, almost reverent expression on his face. On the contrary, Your Honor, he said, his voice ringing with authority, we believe Miss Vance's true assets have been grossly, and I mean grossly, underestimated. Objection! Harrison shouted, leaping to his feet, his face red with irritation. This is an outrageous interruption. This man has no standing here. It's some kind of stunt. Mr. Croft simply raised an eyebrow. I am here to execute the legally certified and recently updated last will and testament of my employer. You see, Mr. Silas Finch passed away peacefully in his sleep 48 hours ago. A collective gasp filled the room. The death of Silas Finch would be front-page news worldwide. And, Mr. Croft continued, his voice dropping slightly as he turned his piercing gaze fully on a stunned and trembling Elara, he named a sole beneficiary to his entire $200 billion estate. A person he has been searching for over 30 years, his only child, his daughter. He took a deliberate step forward, holding out a single, thick, leather-bound document. A woman known to this court as Elara Vance, but known to us and to the world from this moment forward, as Elara Annalise Finch. The courtroom, which had been a low hum of whispers and rustling papers, fell into a silence so profound it was almost deafening. The only sound Elara could hear was the frantic, wild drumming of her own heart against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Elara Annalise Finch. The name was alien, a string of syllables that felt like they belonged to someone else, someone from a novel or a film. Yet the name on her locket, the secret she had carried her entire life, was Silas Finch. It could not be a coincidence. It was impossible. Her mind, which had been numb with defeat, was now reeling, struggling to catch up with a reality that was tilting on its axis. David's face was a mask of utter, almost comical disbelief. His mouth hung slightly ajar, his confident, dismissive posture completely collapsing in on itself as if his spine had turned to jelly. His lawyer, Mr. Harrison, looked equally thunderstruck. His sharp, legal mind was visibly struggling to process the seismic event that had just occurred. He looked from the imposing figure of Julian to Elara, then back again, as if trying to reconcile the image of the meek, penniless woman at the respondent's table with the name of the most powerful heiress on the planet. This is insane, David finally choked out, shooting to his feet. His voice was a high-pitched, incredulous squeak that betrayed his panic. It's a trick, it has to be. She's nobody. I was married to her for 12 years. She's a librarian's assistant. For God's sake. She doesn't know anything about anything. His panic was palpable. He was not just losing an argument. He was watching the entire foundation of his reality, his superiority, crumble. The woman he had dismissed as a simple-minded homemaker was suddenly the wealthiest person he had ever met, by a factor of thousands. Harrison, recovering his senses, quickly tried to spin the situation, to regain control. "Your Honor," he barked, his voice strained. "This is highly irregular. This man walks in here with a wild story. I assure you, Counselor, our certainty is absolute," Julian replied coolly, his composure a stark contrast to the shock waves rolling through the room. He addressed the judge, not the flustered lawyer. "We have DNA confirmation. We have birth records that were sealed by court order, and a lifetime of correspondence from Mr. Finch to his lost daughter. The evidence is irrefutable." He placed the heavy, leather-bound will on the clerk's desk with a soft, definitive thud. The last will and testament of Silas Finch. It names his daughter, Elara Annalise Finch, born Elara Annalise Vance, as the sole inheritor of his estate, his properties, his companies, and his entire liquid fortune, valued at approximately $200 billion. The transfer of assets is already in motion. $200 billion. The number hung in the air, an impossible, astronomical figure. Elara felt dizzy, the world tilting. Her father. She had a father who had been searching for her all her life. She had believed she was an unwanted footnote in someone else's story. Now, she was the entire book. Harrison, however, saw a new angle, a desperate lifeline. "Your Honor," he said, his voice regaining some of its smug confidence. "While this revelation is certainly novel, it changes nothing about today's proceedings. This alleged inheritance, if it is true, occurred after their separation. It is not, and I repeat, not a marital asset. My client's generous offer of $250,000 still stands. In fact, it is even more generous now, as Miss Vance clearly no longer needs it." He was trying to salvage the situation, to frame it as a win, to minimize the bomb that had just detonated. Julian Croft turned his head slowly to face Harrison. A thin, humorless smile graced his lips. It was the smile of a predator that had just watched its prey walk straight into a trap. "You misunderstand, Counselor," he said softly, yet his voice carried to every corner of the room. "I am not here to discuss Miss Finch's inheritance, as it pertains to this divorce. You are correct. That is her separate property." David's shoulders relaxed, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "I am here," Julian continued, his voice dropping to an icy, precise tone, "to discuss the assets that were already hers during the entire 12-year marriage." A new wave of confusion swept the room. "What are you talking about?" David demanded, his voice cracking. Julian's eyes glinted with cold precision. While Mr. Finch was unable to locate his daughter for many years, he never stopped providing for her. On her 18th birthday, long before she ever met Mr. Thorne, Silas Finch established a blind trust in her name, the EAV Trust. Julian's gaze locked onto Elara, who was staring at him, her eyes wide, her mind completely blank. He has been depositing funds into it on every birthday and every major holiday since. The trust was managed by our firm with instructions to grow the capital until she was found. Julian paused, letting the information sink in. Letting the weight of the inevitable build, he then turned his lethal gaze back to Harrison, who had gone utterly pale, finally understanding where this was going. As of this morning, Julian announced, his voice clear and sharp, that blind trust, which legally belonged to Elara Vance, now Finch, throughout the entirety of her 12-year marriage to Mr. Thorne, is valued at approximately $750 million. The sound David made was not a word, it was a strangled, guttural gasp, the sound of a man being punched in the stomach. Harrison's face, usually so ruddy and confident, went a stark, papery white. $750 million. A marital asset. An asset that Elara had been completely unaware of, but which was legally, indisputably hers. The implication was clear, catastrophic, and devastating. According to the very laws of equitable distribution that Harrison had been so smugly lecturing them on, David was not divorcing a poor librarian's assistant. He was divorcing a woman who, for the last 12 years, had been a multi-millionaire, a woman whose secret wealth dwarfed his own $90 million company into insignificance. And he, by his own legal argument, was entitled to none of it, while she was entitled to half of his company. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. Harrison, the master of legal maneuvering, had just been checkmated by a ghost. He had spent the entire day arguing his clients. Genius had built a $90 million company, while unwittingly proving that Elara's $750 million trust was entirely separate from her efforts. He had, in effect, argued against his own client's claim to her money. Elara finally looked up, her eyes locking with David's. The fear, the confusion, the shame, it was all gone. In its place was a calm, quiet strength she had not felt in years. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been annihilated. She saw him for what he was, a small, greedy man, made temporarily large by money, now utterly dwarfed by a power he could not comprehend. So you see, counselor, Julian Croft's voice was as cold and sharp as chipped ice, cutting through the stunned silence. We are not here to ask for a single dollar from Mr. Thorne. In fact, he turned his head, a gesture of profound respect, to the woman who was still processing her own name, Miss Finch, with your permission. We would like to formally withdraw your claim, for 50% of Thorne Innovations. David's eyes, which had been wide with terror, flashed with a sudden, idiotic flicker of hope. Was he off the hook? Was this a gesture of goodwill? And in its place, Julian's voice dropped, becoming lethal as he turned his gaze back to the pale, sweating forms of David and his lawyer. We will be filing a counterclaim. We will be demanding 50% of all marital assets, precisely as the law you were so fond of quoting provides. He let the words sink in. That includes Mr. Thorne's $90 million company, and of course, Miss Finch's $750 million trust fund. The total marital pot is approximately $840 million. We believe, Mr. Thorne's fair and equitable share, he used Harrison's own words like a weapon, comes to approximately $420 million. We are prepared to write him a check today. The room did not just murmur. It erupted. Reporters who had been lazily covering what they assumed was a run-of-the-mill bitter divorce were now scrambling, their phones pressed to their ears as they barked the unbelievable headlines to their editors. Finch. Yes, the Silas Finch, a secret daughter, $200 billion, $750 million in a blind trust. David Thorne, the man who had mocked his wife for being poor, had just been offered a payout that would make him one of the richest men in Chicago. But it was not a victory. It was the ultimate, public humiliation. His entire $90 million empire, his life's work, was now just a rounding error in his ex-wife's finances. He had spent the entire day trying to swindle her out of a fair settlement, only to find out he was the one who had been living in ignorance, a pauper married to a princess. Elara watched, with a strange, icy detachment, as David's fiancée, Chloe, who had looked upon her with such bored disdain, was now staring at her with a mixture of raw awe and terror, as if Elara had suddenly sprouted wings and a halo. Then, in a silent, instinctual act of self-preservation, Chloe slowly began to edge her chair away from David, physically distancing herself from the man whose world had just imploded. Judge Albright, his face a blotchy, apoplectic red, pounded his gavel, but the sound was lost in the pandemonium. Order! Order! In this court. This proceeding is adjourned. He practically yelled, fleeing the bench as if escaping a fire. Elara herself remained still, the calm eye of the storm. The chaos was around her, but not in her. Julian's 2 security personnel materialized at her side. "Miss Finch, this way, please." Their voices were firm but respectful. They did not lead her back to the drab corridor where she had wept. They led her through a private, heavy oak door behind the judge's bench, shielding her from the sudden barrage of flashing cameras and shouted questions that erupted as the courtroom doors burst open. She was no longer Elara Vance, the pitiable wife. She was Elara Finch, an asset to be protected. They entered a quiet, mahogany-paneled chamber. Julian closed the door, and the roar of the media faded to a dull, distant thrum. Elara's legs, which had held her steady through the entire ordeal, finally gave way. She sank into a plush leather chair, her body trembling, not from fear, but from the aftershock of a life-altering detonation. "My father," she whispered. The word felt alien and strange on her tongue. "Silas Finch. Why? Why didn't I know? Why did he leave me?" The old, primal wound of the orphan, the feeling of being unwanted, was her last remaining reflex. Julian's professional demeanor softened, revealing a glimpse of the man who had served his employer loyally for decades. He poured her a glass of water from a crystal decanter, his movements practiced and gentle. "Miss Finch, Elara. I know this is a great deal to process. He did not leave you. I promise you," he tried. He then explained the story, and it was a tragedy, told in brief, compassionate strokes. Her mother, Annalise, was the love of Silas' life, a brilliant art historian. They had kept their relationship private, away from the prying eyes of the world that followed a man of his stature. Annalise had died from complications during childbirth. In his blinding grief, Silas had been betrayed. A distant, jealous relative, entrusted with the baby's care while he made the funeral arrangements, had maliciously, spitefully, given the infant Elara over to the state foster system. "She told your father," Julian said, his voice heavy with the weight of the old tragedy, "that the child, that you, had also passed away." Elara's hand flew to her mouth, a sob catching in her throat. "He believed you were gone for 5 years," Julian continued. It was not until the relative was on her deathbed that she confessed, a final, cruel act. "Your father learned the truth. You were alive, but you were lost. Your name had been changed. You were lost in the foster care system. He has been searching for you ever since, Elara. He poured billions into the search. He hired the best investigators in the world, but you had moved so many times, and records from that era were imperfect or sealed. We came close, several times, but we were always one step behind. We finally found you, 3 months ago," Julian said. "We confirmed it was you. The DNA, the records, the locket, it was all confirmed." He was overjoyed, Julian said, and for the first time, his own voice broke slightly. He was terminally ill, Elara. He had been for some time. He was planning how to approach you, how to explain everything. He didn't want to frighten you. He was just trying to hang on, long enough to meet you in person, just once. Julian looked away, composing himself. "I am so sorry." His greatest regret was that he ran out of time. Tears streamed down Elara's face, but they were not the hot tears of humiliation from the courtroom. They were tears of a profound, earth-shattering connection. She was not an accident. She was not an inconvenience. She was loved. She had been sought after. Her entire life, she had felt like a ghost. Now, she was finally real. Meanwhile, back in the now empty, chaotic courtroom, David Thorne finally snapped out of his trance. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a curdling, venomous, narcissistic rage. His mind could not process defeat. It could only process betrayal. "She knew," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. He grabbed Harrison's sleeve, his fingers digging in like claws. That whole act, the timid little librarian. The victim, she knew all along. She was playing me, she was playing all of us. Marcus, that's impossible, Harrison reasoned, his own face pale. He was sweating through his expensive shirt, his own reputation in tatters. Croft said they only found her 3 months ago. They hadn't even contacted her yet. She looked as shocked as we were. Don't be naive, David spat, his face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. This is a setup. This is her revenge, making me look like a fool, dangling that money in my face. $420 million. She wants me to take a handout from her. The humiliation was a poison in his veins. For 12 years, he had been the provider, the genius, the one in control. His entire identity was built on his superiority over her. This revelation, that she had been secretly, infinitely wealthier and more powerful all along, was an existential threat. It invalidated his entire life's narrative. We fight this, David declared, his eyes wild. Fight what? Harrison exclaimed. Fight them, Finch Global. Are you insane, Marcus? I will not take her charity, David roared, slamming his fist on the polished wooden table. I will not be her poor ex-husband. We challenge the will. We challenge the trust. We argue that she hid the assets. Marital fraud, something, anything. Marcus, you have no grounds, Harrison pleaded, seeing his own career circling the drain. We would be laughed out of court. They have DNA. They are Finch Global. Their legal team could buy and sell our entire firm before breakfast. You were just offered a life-changing sum of money. Take the win. Take the money. It's not a win, David screamed, his voice cracking with a desperate, wounded pride. It's a disgrace. I built a $90 million company with my own 2 hands. I will not be reduced to a footnote in my ex-wife's charity case. His ego, a fragile and bloated thing, could not withstand the blow. He could not accept the reality. The grudge was taking root, a dark and twisted thing. He would not just take the money and walk away. He would try to tear her down. He would expose her as a fraud, even if it meant destroying himself in the process. He had mocked her for her poverty. Now, he would hate her for her wealth. The days that followed were a blur of impossible, suffocating luxury. Elara was no longer Elara Vance, the invisible woman. She was Elara Finch, a global headline, the billionaire Cinderella, the secret heiress, the richest woman you've never heard of. Paparazzi were camped outside the Grand Majestic Hotel, a permanent, buzzing swarm of flashing lights. Julian had moved her into the hotel's presidential suite, a sprawling fortress of marble, glass, and silent, opulent dread that took up the entire top floor. It was a gilded cage, and it was overwhelming. Her old apartment in Chicago could have fit, 20 times over, into the suite's master living room. An army of silent staff materialized at the press of a button, which she avoided, instead trying to make her own coffee and feeling foolish when she could not operate the impossibly complex, built-in silver machine. She was used to the smell of old paper and dust at the library. Here, the air was scented with expensive, unidentifiable flowers that were replaced every morning before she even woke up. She felt like an imposter, a common sparrow trapped in a diamond-encrusted vault, and the isolation was crushing. Julian, ever-present and infinitely patient, began the monumental task of walking her through the empire that was now hers. The scale of it was beyond comprehension. Finch Global was not just a company. It was a sovereign entity, a global ecosystem. It had divisions in technology, renewable energy, pharmaceuticals, and global shipping. It employed over 500,000 people worldwide. Elara sat in meetings in the suite's massive dining room, converted into a temporary command center. The table was long enough for 30 people. Board members, division heads, and financial advisors, all powerful, intimidating figures in their own right, were flown in from London, Tokyo, and Hong Kong. They sat at the far end, speaking in a language she did not understand, a language of acquisitions, market caps, and leveraged buyouts. She listened quietly, her face a mask of calm, the same mask she had worn in the courtroom, but inside, she was drowning. A man named Henderson, the sharp, silver-haired head of acquisitions, had directed a question at her. Miss Finch, we have a standing offer on the table for the Kronos Energy portfolio. It's a 30% premium, but I believe we should counter. What is your position on the leveraged? Elara had just stared, her mind completely blank, a cold panic rising in her chest. Julian had stepped in smoothly. "Mr. Henderson, Miss Finch, is still in her review period. All standing offers will be held until she has been fully briefed. For now, maintain your current position." The man had nodded, but Elara saw his look. The look of a man, assessing, and judging, and finding her wanting. She was a figurehead, a librarian who had won the lottery. A child at the adults' table. That evening, after a grueling 12-hour day of such briefings, Julian found her standing by the panoramic window, looking out at the glittering New York cityscape below. "It is a lot to take in," he said gently, standing a respectful distance away. Elara's voice was barely a whisper, brittle with a fear she had not allowed herself to show anyone. "I am going to break it. All of this, everything he built." She turned to face him, the tears she had held back all day, finally burning in her eyes. "He must have made a mistake, Julian. I am a librarian. I organize books." Today, they were talking about leveraged buyouts and derivatives. "I do not know what those words mean. They know it. They look at me, and they see a joke. He left all this, to me, and I am going to destroy it." "He knew that," Julian said, his voice soft but firm. "He knew you were not a CEO. Silas was not a sentimentalist, Elara. He was a pragmatist. He did not leave you his fortune simply because you were his daughter. He left it to you because he believed you had the character to wield it. He knew you would learn what you needed to know, and that you would not be corrupted by what you did not." Elara turned from the window, a skeptical, heartbroken look on her face. "What character?" "He did not know me." "He knew more than you think," Julian replied. He gestured to a large, sealed wooden crate that had been delivered to the suite earlier that day. "He left these for you. His personal effects from his private study. He wanted you to have them immediately." Later that night, alone in the cavernous silence of the suite, Elara finally opened the crate. Inside were not business files or trophies. There were boxes of books, worn vinyl records, photo albums, and on top of it all, a series of thick, leather-bound journals. It was her father's handwriting, strong and elegant. Her hands, trembling slightly, opened the first one. The first entry was dated 5 years after she was born, on the day he learned the truth. "They told me my Elara was gone. Today, I learned that was a lie. She is out there, somewhere. I have a daughter. And I will not rest until I find her." Elara read for hours. The city lights blurred as tears streamed down her face. She was not reading the words of a titan of industry. She was reading the words of a father. He wrote to her, as if she were there with him, detailing his business decisions, not in terms of profits and losses, in terms of the world he wanted to build for her, a world he hoped she would one day inherit and make better. She found the passage, his words reaching across time. "Money is a tool, Elara. Nothing more. It can build, or it can destroy. It is a magnifier, it reveals character, it does not create it. I have seen what greed does to men. It makes them hollow. I pray you never lose your heart, for it is a far greater treasure than anything I can ever leave you." She read on, finding another entry from a decade ago. "I despise bullies. They are the weakest of men, for they must steal strength from others. True strength is quiet. It is resilience. It is the integrity to stand by your principles when the world tries to shout you down. That is the strength I hope you have. That is the strength I am betting my entire legacy on." Through his words, she finally met him. He was not just a billionaire. He was a man of profound depth, intelligence, and a desperate, aching love for the daughter he never knew. And in his descriptions of the daughter he hoped to find, she began to see herself. He had not been looking for a CEO. He had been looking for a person of substance, integrity, and resilience. He had trusted that the little girl lost to the world would grow into a woman of character. Her grief and confusion, the crushing weight of being an imposter, began to recede. It was replaced by something new, something solid. An ice-cold purpose. It was in this new, clear-headed state that she saw the interview. It was nearly dawn. She had not slept. She turned on the suite's massive television, and there was his face. David. He had followed through on his threat. He was on a major news network, his face a mask of faux sincerity and victimhood, his eyes perfectly calculated to look wounded. She played the long game, David claimed, his voice filled with a manufactured, throbbing pain. She pretended to be simple, to be content with nothing. She let me build my company, and she pretended to be this timid, simple wife, all while sitting on a secret, $750 million fortune. Our entire marriage, all 12 years, was a lie. She committed fraud. She fooled me. She fooled everyone. The public, initially sympathetic, was beginning to waver. The narrative he was spinning was insidious, and to some, believable. Could someone truly be unaware of such a fortune? Elara watched the interview on the wall-sized screen, her face impassive. A few days ago, his words would have shattered her. They would have sent her spiraling back into the self-doubt he had so carefully cultivated for over a decade. But she was not Elara Vance anymore. She set the remote down on the marble table. The last flicker of her old, trembling self, the part of her that ached for his approval, the part that had been willing to make herself small to make him feel big, died. It was snuffed out, replaced by a steely, cold resolve. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Money reveals character. She was finally seeing David's. Hollow. I despise bullies. David had mistaken her quiet nature for weakness. He had mistaken her sacrifice for stupidity. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had not just declared war on his ex-wife. He had declared war on Finch Global. Her hands were perfectly steady. Her heart did not hammer. It beat with a slow, cold, methodical rhythm. She stood up, walked to the panoramic window, and watched the sun rise over the city. Her city. She picked up the secure phone Julian had given her. He answered on the first ring, his voice already alert. Julian. Her voice was clear and steady, devoid of the doubt that had plagued her just hours before. Elara. I saw it. Do not let him. Schedule a full board meeting, she interrupted, her tone polite but absolute. Tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. At the main headquarters. It is time I introduced myself. The Finch Global headquarters was a sleek, imposing tower of glass and steel that pierced the New York skyline. It was a monument to power, a place where decisions were made that could alter the course of entire nations. As Elara stepped out of the armored sedan, flanked by her security team, she felt a familiar, cold tremor of her old insecurity. This was the lion's den. She, the librarian, was about to walk into it. But then she straightened her shoulders, her hand instinctively touching the simple silver locket beneath her dress. She remembered her father's words. Never let them see you doubt yourself, even when you do. She was dressed not in the couture gowns the media expected, but in a simple, elegant dark gray business dress. It was a statement. She was not a socialite, not a celebrity. She was here to work. The boardroom was on the top floor, a cavernous space with a table that could seat 40. The entire executive board was assembled, a collection of the most brilliant and ruthless minds in the corporate world. The men and women who had built this empire alongside her father. They watched her with hawk-like intensity as she entered, Julian by her side. They were assessing her, measuring her, their faces polite masks that did not hide their skepticism. They were wondering if the empire Silas Finch had built was now in the hands of a weak, unqualified amateur. Elara walked to the head of the table, to the empty chair that had been her father's. She did not sit. She stood, her hands resting lightly on the back of the chair, and looked each board member in the eye, one by one, holding their gaze until they looked away. The room was so quiet she could hear the faint hum of the city far below. "Good morning," she began. Her voice was calm, measured, amplified slightly by the room's hidden acoustics. It did not tremble. "My name is Elara Finch. I know many of you have questions. You have dedicated your careers to this company, to my father. You are wondering about the future. You are wondering about me." She paused, letting the silence settle. "I did not ask for this. I did not expect this. I am not my father. I do not have his experience or his singular genius. I will not pretend that I do. For the past 12 years, I was a wife, a homemaker, and a librarian's assistant. My life was small." A few of the board members exchanged uneasy glances. This was not the confident, visionary speech they were hoping for. But in the last week, Elara continued, her voice gaining a new edge of steel, "I have been reading my father's journals. I have learned about the man he was, not just the titan of industry you knew. I have learned about his principles. He built this company not just to accumulate wealth, but to innovate, to solve problems, and to build a better world. He believed in integrity, he despised bullies. And he trusted that I, his daughter, would carry on that legacy. Her gaze swept across the room. I will not fail him. Her tone shifted, becoming sharp and decisive, which brings me to my first official act as the owner of this company. It is a small matter of personal housekeeping, but one that I feel is necessary to address before we move forward. She nodded to an aide, who dimmed the lights and turned on a large screen behind her. An image of David Thorne's smirking face, taken from his tabloid interview, filled the screen. "This is Marcus Thorne," Elara said, her voice devoid of emotion. "My ex-husband. As you may know, he has rejected a settlement of $420 million and has chosen instead to engage in a campaign of public harassment and baseless litigation against me, and by extension, this company." She clicked a remote. A new slide appeared, detailing Thorne Innovations, its market share, its key clients, its patents. Thorne Innovations is a successful, if modest, tech consulting firm, Elara stated. The board members looked confused, wondering where this was going. However, Elara said, her voice dropping, their primary server contract, which accounts for 60% of their operational capacity, is with a subsidiary of ours, Apex Data Solutions. Furthermore, their largest client, the Sterling Reed Group, relies on a logistics network owned and operated by Finch Global Shipping. And their most valuable patent, the one that runs their core product, was developed using a foundational algorithm that, unknown to Mr. Thorne, was licensed from a Finch Global Tech incubator 10 years ago. A license that is up for renewal next month. The board members began to murmur. The man named Henderson, who had questioned her in the suite, now looked at her with a new, sharp respect. They were starting to understand. Silas Finch's reach was so vast, it was almost impossible to do business in any sector without, at some level, doing business with him. David, in his arrogance, had no idea that the very foundations of his company were propped up by the empire of the woman he was trying to destroy. "Mr. Thorne believes he is an independent, self-made success story," Elara said, her voice now cold as ice. "He is mistaken. He is a tenant in a house he believes he owns. And she paused, letting the words hang in the air, am the landlord." She turned off the screen, the lights came up. "Julian, please inform our legal team of the following. Effective immediately, we are terminating the server contract with Thorne Innovations, citing a breach of a newly invoked partner ethics clause. Second, inform the Sterling Reed Group that due to a strategic realignment, their logistics costs through our network will be increasing by 300%, unless they choose to partner with one of our preferred, more stable, tech consultants. Finally, inform Thorne Innovations that their algorithm license will not be renewed." Julian Croft simply nodded, a glimmer of deep, profound respect in his eyes. The board was silent, stunned. With 3 sentences, Elara had not just attacked David's company. She had surgically and ruthlessly dismantled it. It would be bankrupt within 6 months. As for the divorce, she continued, we are withdrawing the $420 million offer. My original claim stands. I am entitled to 50% of his company. I will be taking my $45 million worth of shares. When the company collapses, those shares will be worthless. But I will have made my point. She looked around the boardroom again. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a mixture of shock, awe, and perhaps a little fear. They had expected a librarian. They had gotten a Finch. "My father despised bullies," she repeated, her voice now soft, but carrying immense weight. "He taught me through his words that power is not to be used for personal vengeance, but it must be used to protect what is yours and to decisively end threats. Mr. Thorne is a threat. Today, that threat has been ended. Now," she said, finally taking her seat at the head of the table, "let's talk about the future of Finch Global's renewable energy division." The final court date was a stark contrast to the first. The room was packed, not with bored spectators, but with serious financial journalists. Elara arrived quietly, flanked by Julian. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, looking serene and composed. David was already there, a shrunken, haggard version of his former self. His bespoke suit was wrinkled, his face was unshaven, and his eyes were filled with a defeated, hollow hatred. His fiancée, Chloe, was gone. His lawyer, Harrison, was also gone, having formally withdrawn from the case. David was left with a second-rate public lawyer, who looked terrified. The proceedings were brief. David's lawyer meekly accepted Elara's original claim. A financial analyst, one of Elara's, presented the company's current valuation. After the cancelled contracts, the loss of its largest client, and the non-renewal of its core intellectual property, Thorne Innovations was drowning in debt. Its net value was negative $3 million. Elara's 50% share was a debt of $1.5 million. Elara's lawyer, a senior partner from Finch Global's legal team, stood. "Your Honor, my client, Miss Finch, in a show of good faith and a desire to close this chapter, has decided to graciously forgive Mr. Thorne's half of the debt." It was the final, quietest, most devastating blow. She was not just taking his company, she was absolving him of his debt, an act of charity that underscored the infinite, uncrossable gulf that now lay between them. It was not an act of kindness, but a final, dismissive gesture of power. She was writing him off, not just as a husband, but as a balance sheet entry. After the gavel fell, Elara stood and walked out of the courtroom without a single backward glance. David remained seated, a broken man left with nothing but the public humiliation of his own making. Elara did not return to the penthouse suite at the hotel. Instead, she asked her driver to take her to a place she had not visited in years. The small, run-down public library in Chicago, where she used to work. She walked through the familiar aisles, the scent of old books and floor wax, a comforting balm. She ran her fingers over the worn spines, remembering the quiet peace she had found in this place, a sanctuary from her unhappy marriage. She realized then that her old life had not been a weakness. Her quiet nature, her love of books, her ability to endure, these were not flaws to be mocked. They were the source of her strength. It was in the quiet moments that her character had been forged. The character her father had trusted. David, with all his noise and bluster, was the weak one. His strength was borrowed from money and status. Hers was innate. Standing there among the stories of ages, Elara Finch, the secret heiress, finally understood. She had not inherited a fortune. She had inherited a responsibility. Her victory was not in crushing David or in the billions of dollars now at her command. Her victory was in the quiet realization of her own worth. A worth that had been there all along, hidden in plain sight, waiting for her to finally claim it. Her new life was not about the money or the power. It was about honoring a father she had never met, by becoming the woman he always believed she was. What did you think of Elara's final move? Was it pure justice or the perfect, coldest revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of hidden strength and ultimate vindication, please hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good revenge story, and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video.